Good afternoon, everybody. This is Brian Miller of DCED, PHMIS specialist. I'm also here with Javon Clark of Lawrence County Community Action Partnership. We are here to present the monthly training for Western Continuum Coordinated Entry series. This training is going to take place mostly around HIS. We actually have some updates that we are planning on putting out for tomorrow into the production system. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically give you a kind of a complete 101 training of the entire coordinated entry system within HMIS. And we're going to go through the intake, the screenings, assessments, as well as the placement of the prioritization list. And then we are also going to cover the prioritization list itself and the features for searching, locating, and the features available for managing clients on that list as well. We have a pretty big class here today, so we have everybody muted. Except for myself, and Javon is unmuted as well, so she can go ahead and chime in anytime she has any thing to add or anything that pops up during the training that she would like to add of note. But what we're going to do is go ahead and we are going to use the new updated HMIS Coordinated Entry System Guide that we've updated for the training. And we're going to kind of use this as an outline for the training that we're going to go through, and a lot of it's going to be demo style. We hope to provide this guide along with this training link, hopefully tomorrow, when we perform and push out the releases that you're going to see today. There's not a lot of releases, not a lot of structural changes. We did make a few updates here in the system, and when we come across those, within the training, I will point them out and make note of the changes from the earlier versions within the system itself. So what I'm going to do is kind of show you table of contents and go through the basic outline, coordinated entry process. We're going to kind of take you through the intake and assessment, client intake process, the pre-screening, as well as the screening tool, and we will cover the placement on the prioritization list. So we do have these all documented in our guide itself. Most of the training is going to take place within the system itself, so I'm going to kind of jump back and forth between the outline of the guide as well as doing demos with the system itself. If anybody has any questions during the training while we're providing it, we have everybody on mute. Everyone should have a chat option up at the top of their screen. It's in their control bar. You can go ahead and enter any questions that you might have or clarifications that you have in that chat, and we can get to them during breaks or when we change from different sections, or at the end of the training, we can make sure any clarifications or answers are answered. So what we're going to do for the first part of the training is cover the entire intake and assessment part of the training. What we're going to do is jump into the system itself, and hopefully most people are familiar with the system itself. To make sure everybody's muted, I have a little background noise there. With the system itself, it is web-based. Everybody has a username and a password in it, just to give some general navigation options to it. A lot of times when you log on, you are placed on the client tab itself, and you have a basic menu. They'll have specific options within that tab you're in. The system is broken up into what we call workspaces or tabs, which are different areas of the system that provide different functions or forms to work on. This part of the training is taking place in mostly the Clients tab, which is where a lot of the client data collection and the client part of the system is. Using this option here, this can actually allow you to switch between the workspaces for the tabs in the system. As you can see, we are on the Clients tab. Basically, to select the workspace tab, you can simply select that option in the carousel. The other main option that we will be showing within the training later on will be Priority tab, and that's where all the actual prioritization list is located. And we will be switching there for this part of the training to cover all the options there as well. The other option to talk about is Home tab, and that's kind of a user tab, if you will, and also within the coordinated entry work group has a lot of your reports that you can get to as well within this tab as well. But just after that, just to give you a basic overview of the tabs and the navigation system for any new people that's there. But you're on the Client tab, and we are going to start with the intake and assessment, which is always done with the native entry intake option here on the top of your page here. And this is the intake option that allows you to to begin the process of doing an actual intake. And this is when someone comes into your assessment center or you take a call into your assessment center for someone being placed into the coordinated entry system. Once you click on, it'll actually start a process, or what we call flow, that allows you to through a number of processes that we kind of showed on the outline. It starts with the client intake, and that's where we go through the pre-screening as well as the screening tool, which is a large part of the process, and then the eventual placement onto the prioritization list. What I'm actually going to do here is I am going to people said I was breaking up a little bit, like might be having some sound problems. So I'm taking myself off speaker, so hoping that this can help a little bit, that everybody can hear me a little more clearly. Also, I asked anybody that on their end, if they would mind muting themselves on their side as well. I know we have everybody muted on our side, but sometimes the system allows some ambient noise through, so if you wouldn't mind muting your phone on your side as well, help keep the background noise at a minimum. Before I continue, what I'm going to do is go ahead and close the menu here so I can open up the screen, and we can start on the client intake, first step of the process. Now, I know I have two different intakes. We have the GACs, or what we call our general assessment centers, which is for general or regular clients, and then we have our DVACs, our domestic violence assessment centers. We are starting with an example of a GAC. This is going to go through the process of a regular client with full client information being entered into the system. We cover the DVACs after we cover the GACs. So this is a client basic form that allows basically you to either create a new person in the system or to select a person that already exists in the system. This has changed from the past, but we have changed some of the language on the screen to try to help make it more of a survey type situation where it now says, may I please have your first name and last name, as well as a telephone number in case we get disconnected. Because what you're going to do, starting with this spot, you will enter it into the search, and as soon as you tab off the last name or hit the magnifying glass, what the system actually does is it is going to perform an actual search within the system to find or look to see if that client already exists within the system or not. You can also, once you've entered in the first and last name, you can also add in additional information such as, social security number, date of birth. As much information as you have on the client is recommended because you can enter in information and research as many times as you want to make sure you can find or ensure that the client is not in the system. Down at the area below, you will see a results grid that basically brings in people that'll show any results that return from your search. As we can see here, there are no records found, so that traditionally means there are no matches in the system. So for this person, Jack Williams, there are no matches found, so we can cancel out and we can assume he's not in the system and he will be a new client moving forward. What I do want to do is show you an example of an existing client in the system to kind of show you, because I know there is a John Johnson in the system with before in my testing client, to kind of show you what that looks like if you were to find an existing client in the system. So once you go ahead and search in, as you can see here, off the name, it brings, and you can see down here, there will be returned results. And you can use this information that's brought back to determine if that's actually the client that you're looking for. And that's why it's always better to enter in additional information about the client to lessen your search to make it more exacting. Now, if you do find the client in the system that does match who you're looking for, and that is the client, all you have to do is select him. And basically, that's just clicking anywhere on the row. And the system will automatically load him onto the screen. And as you can see, it shows owned by your organization, yes. That means that's a client record of your organization. It's not a new client. And you can use that existing client moving forward for the rest of the process. And of course, it's always paramount and very important to search for existing clients in the system for deduplication purposes. Another good reason is when an existing client is found, we have a call history section up at the top that will load information about that client. Since they're already in the system, we have a historical record of them, and it will show information such as their most recent pre-screening, when they were placed on the prioritization list, whether they have an active or historical record, as well as it brings up all these options to show historical data. Like you can look at their coordinated intake notes history. You can look at pre-screenings or any screening tool assessments that they may have found. So those are some additional information and tools that can be used when you're working with or looking for existing clients in the system. Now, once you've found your client, you can go ahead and hit Save and Continue. And depending on whether you've selected an existing client or you're starting with a new client, the system will use that client for the rest of the process. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click on Client Intake and restart again because I don't want to use an existing client. I actually wanted to use Jack Williams. I just wanted to show you an example of what it would look like and how to select an existing client within the system itself. So as we see here, we know Jack Williams is not in the system. So you can cancel out. And what we're going to go ahead and do is enter in his date of birth and his social security number. And you can enter in a telephone number if that is provided as well. And before continuing, there is also a client sharing option. And this is a verbal request for sharing of their HMIS record, but it's only their client record and their coordinated entry information with other assessment centers and other CES partners within the group. This doesn't relate to global sharing or an ROI. It just allows us to, if they do allow and verbally agree to share their information, that means we will basically refer out their information to all the other CES partners so that they can also see their client record. However, if they don't explicitly agree to it, then you must select no. That allows you to continue along with the process, and they can still go on the prioritization list. It just means their individual client record will not be referred to all of the other CES partners. But we're going to go ahead and select yes there for this example. Once all this information, you've got your client all situated and sharing answered, you go ahead and hit save and continue, and it will take you to the next step in the process, which is the pre-screening. Now, we have made a couple changes to the pre-screening, although most of them are fairly minor. There are kind of more rules in requiring specific data collection validation. There are two sections. If it is an existing client, if they've had any previous pre-screenings, they will be shown up here within this top window. Since this is a new client, they're not going to have any pre-screening, so you don't have any ability to choose or reuse an existing or view an existing pre-screen, but that is an option for returning clients. For new clients or those existing clients where you want to enter in a new pre-screening, you have the 3 basic questions. And it's basically now prompts, please answer the following questions to the best of your ability to allow us to match you with the most appropriate service needs. And it basically asks whether they are literally homeless, and it needs to be answered with a yes or no. Are you at risk of becoming homeless? Yes or no. As well as, is anyone in your home making you feel unsafe or afraid? Yes or no. All of these questions have remained the same and haven't changed. The one difference between with this new update is all of these questions are now required. So you will not be able to leave any of those blank. You will have to answer each of them as yes or no. The other change that we have done to make sure that we're properly categorizing clients when they enter into the system, or at least through the pre-screening, is the categorization of whether they're literally homeless or whether they're at risk of homeless. The system requires you to only select yes to one of these classifications. So in the case that you accidentally answer yes to both classifications, if that happens, the system will actually stop you and prompt you with a message saying that, hey, you've identified or classified this client as both literally homeless and at risk of homelessness, and it won't let you continue with both of them answered as yes, so you'll need to answer only one of them with yes before continuing. So those are the main changes that we've made or will be making for tomorrow's release in the system to try to streamline it a little better and get a little bit better data into the system. We also still have the fair housing questions. So if you answer yes to being literally homeless or at risk of being homeless, they do ask the fair housing questions about discrimination during an eviction process or discrimination in a housing search. If you answer yes to either of these questions, the system allows you to also request this information or advice to be received by the Fair Housing Law Center by checking either one of these boxes. Once you have recorded the pre-screening, if advice is asked, what the system will do is it will automatically send an email directly to the Fair Housing Law Center with your information with the client's information and telephone number so that they can be directly contacted by the Fair Housing Law Center to provide advice on that situation. So we're going to go ahead and answer that there. Now, we still do have validation in the system based on the pre-screening to determine who is eligible to continue on in the system. Since the system is, the coordinated entry system as a whole is for people that are either literally homeless or at risk of being homeless. If neither of literally homeless or at risk of becoming homeless are selected and you continue, the system will stop you at that point. Ask you to refer them to other non-homeless services. Since if they're not literally homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, they don't meet the eligibility or homeless requirements to further enter into the system, and there's no need to do a screening tool on them. The other validation it does is it's based on if anybody is making you feel safe or making you feel unsafe or afraid. From a general assessment center standpoint, if that answer is selected as yes, the system will stop you as well, and it will ask you to refer this client or this household who could be potentially fleeing a domestic violence situation directly to a DVAC within your area so that they can take over the intake and provide the intake and assessment process for that specific demographic. So those are still in the system, and if you do come across those, I just kind of want to show you an example. If you were to select yes there, the system will stop and basically give you a message saying, hey, we're going to end the process here because of either they don't meet the requirements or they need to be sent to a DVAC. That is still in the system, and those validation rules are still there to help guide you through the process. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and answer yes to the literally homeless for this client, and no, as this client is not fleeing or potentially fleeing a DV situation. In that situation, once you've finished the pre-screening, go ahead and hit Save and Next. And if you're not stopped by either of those two validations, the system will then load the coordinated screening tool, coordinated assessment screening tool in the system, which is the third part of the intake process, and is actually a pretty big part of the screening process as a whole. It is made up of 8 specific tabs or pages, and each page has very specific questions related to their specific topic, as we can see here at the top. And the system basically allows you to go through and answer the questions on each page, and you can next through each page, and the system will provide on-the-fly and ongoing scoring based on these questions and answers that you provide to them. The first page is basic demographics, which basically asks for background on the client, and a lot of the answers within the screening tool themselves come in the form of drop-down menus, which you can select the specific answer from. There are also text boxes to enter in information. So those familiar with HMIS should be very familiar with a lot of this information on the demographics page. Once you have finished the first page, you can go ahead and hit next, and the system will take you to the homeless assessment page. Now, once you get beyond the demographics, most of the the rest of the pages are dedicated to providing scoring for the overall prioritization of the screening tool. And the second tab is the homeless assessment, which is basically surrounds homelessness, their homeless history, as well as providing information on whether they're chronically homeless or not. Now, one of the bigger updates that we have done that we are planning on releasing tomorrow is an update to the homeless history grid. Because I know in the past, the homeless history grid, you've basically entered in the homeless episode history for your clients. And then a lot of the information below where you enter in number of, total number of days homeless, as well as answer questions about chronic homelessness has been left up to the user. What we've actually done is we've built, hopefully we've built a smarter homeless episode grid that can allow you to enter in these episodes, and the system will take the information you've entered and automatically calculate most of this information directly for you. One of the big changes is the homeless episode grid is no longer directly on the page, but to get to it, you need to actually click on the Add or Edit Homeless History button. And what that does is that actually takes you to it kind of pops you off to a secondary screen, and it allows you to make updates, edits, as well as additions to the grid itself. And then once you're done with the homeless history grid, it'll take you directly back to the screening tool itself, and it'll perform all the calculations you need for, you know, total number of, you know, continuous days homeless, as well as chronically homeless, total number of months currently homeless, number of total episodes, as well as the overall number of days homeless. So what we're going to do is go through some examples of filling out the homeless grid. Now, a lot of the information within the homeless grid itself has not changed. So the first thing that you enter is the homeless location, which is basically where the homeless episode or the homeless stay occurred, and it's one of these 6 selections. And then you can enter in the provider name or location description of where this took place. Then it asks for the dates in which this specific homeless episode took place. And it also has a leave reason for those episodes that are in the past. And what you do is you start with the current living situation. This is actually a new option that we've added in that actually helps identify the latest or most recent episode. It always defaults to the top. So when entering in new information, it should automatically be selected. And what this actually allows you to do is the end date used to always be required. Now, it is still required for previous homeless episodes, but the current living situation or the current homeless episode, if it is still ongoing, you are allowed now to leave the end date blank. The idea there, allowing it to be ongoing to allow us to, in the future, automate the updating of their continuous days homeless without having to go in and manually update the date when you revisit the record. So that's a good point one of the improvements that we have made to the grid itself. Now, once you've entered in their current living situation, then you basically work your way backwards for the last 3 years and enter in all the homeless stays that they've had. The most recent all the way back. So we're going to go ahead and enter in and I'm going to go ahead and enter in a bunch of situations here, because we've also entered in okay. Okay, so this would be an example of entering in homeless situations for a specific client. And as you can see here, you enter in the start and the end date of each specific episode. And there's also a leave reason that you can enter in. It's not required, but can help for informational purposes. Couple of the new things that we have entered is we now allow you to update or upload documentation for each stay. So that can be used to, choose the file, and it basically allows you to, like any kind of file upload system, allows you to search your system and basically attach a file to each of the episodes. And that will be available and visible to anybody that has access to any CES partner that can get to the screening assessment and also view that information. The other crucial thing that we've added is this field here, which is had a break in continuous homeless episodes. This field, as I said before, we've made the grid a little bit smarter to help calculate a lot of the homeless assessment metrics automatically with the information you've entered. We still need a little bit of help from the user side in determining when a break has occurred in terms of a continuous episode. Because basically you have a number of homeless stays and they can be a continuous episode, but when a break occurs is when there is a actual break in the actual homeless stays. If it is an institutional stay that's over 90 days, or if it's temporary or permanent housing stay, basically any non-homeless stay that is over 7 days. So what we actually recommend is once you've entered in all of your information here, kind of gone through all of the different episodes, what you need to do is go back and see if any of these episodes, if there was a break in between them of either 90 days of institutional or over 7 days of temporary. And the best way to do that is kind of look between the start and the end dates of the previous two. And as you can see here, well, this was 10-5 to 10-7, and they're both homeless. So That's under 7 days, so we're good there, so there was no break there. So now if we look here, we've got 8/21 to 9/1. So that is a 10-day break. So that means where they stayed for those 10 days. Since it isn't in the grid, it wasn't a homeless stay. And if it wasn't an institutional stay, what you'll need to do is actually check that box to indicate that, hey, that 10 days, that was a break. So that means that ends the continuous homeless episode going down the list. And then you can kind of go down the list on each side as well. So now we go to the next one, and we can see 8/1 down to 4/21. Now that is well over 90 days. That's probably closer to 4 months, 120 days. So no matter what the situation, even if it is institutional, that is another break in continuous homelessness as well. So this break here is very helpful in helping us determine and do the calculations for determining you know, how many episodes you've actually had, as well as determining how long is your current episode versus your overall episodes of homelessness. So that's one of the biggest changes, and probably the biggest change that we're planning to make going forward. Now, once you are done entering in this information, you can hit save and close. You can actually just hit save, and what that'll do is that'll just save the information on the screen itself. But I recommend hitting save and close. That'll actually take you, that'll save the information, and it will take you directly back to the screening itself. Now, as you can see here, you've got the 8/1, 8/21. I should have actually checked this box here, but let's say I accidentally forgot it. I want to show you when we go back that we've actually got some messaging in the system, especially since this break is a little bit new, to kind of help everyone make sure that they're entering in the information as best they can, as well as entering in the breaks properly. Now, from all this information that we've entered, the system will then take a look, and it will actually give you a message when it sees breaks or potential breaks. So anytime there's a break that's over 90 days, doesn't matter what it was, since it was over 90 days, that means that it's definitely an end in continuous homelessness. The system will automatically check that box for you and automatically identify it. So even though I missed it when I did the data entry, the system knows that, hey, no matter the situation, that's a break, it'll automatically catch those for you. The main ones that we're looking for and we need your help to catch are the breaks that are between 8 and 90 days. So it will still flash a message here to say, hey, this could be a potential break in between episodes. So at least it can bring it to your attention to whether you need to check that option or not. And it all depends on whether they are at an institutional setting, which can be up to 90 days, or they were just in a non-homeless setting, which a break is constituted once it exceeds 7 days. And you can always go directly back into, as you can see here, this is all read-only. So this is kind of a read-only kind of situation that helps us automatically calculate the information. You can always hit the Add Edit button, and it'll always take you right back into the grid itself, and you can go ahead and add more stays if you need to, or you can make corrections to the actual information that you've entered as well. Oops. And you always have to be careful of, and this is from the previous version as well, you don't want to make sure that you have any extra rows checked or highlighted, because it'll think that it needs to be filled out. So you want to make sure that those are unchecked before you hit save and close, and taking you back as well. So that's kind of the new process that the system is going to be using for this homeless history. And as I said, from this information and from the break, the system basically now automatically calculates, the overall homeless history, which is their total number of days homeless for the whole 3 years entered. It automatically for you calculates the total number of current continuous days. And then it also automatically calculates number of continuous months, total number of homeless episodes, total number of months homeless. And then with that information, both of these questions, the been literally homeless for 12 consecutive months or had 4 or more separate episodes, that total at least 12 months, those are automatically answered from this information. And a lot of all that information is automatically fed into the chronically homeless to help identify that client as well. So a couple of the questions that you still need to answer on the screen is whether they have a disabling condition or not. And that feeds also into chronically homeless, as a person needs to be disabled or have a disabling condition to be identified as chronically homeless, as well as whether it's been verified by a medical doctor or practitioner. It also asks for current housing status. The system also asks for also prompts for the current housing status. Based on the pre-screening, how you've answered it, whether they entered as literally homeless or at risk of homeless, the system will default this answer automatically. So if they were literally homeless, if that was the yes when you entered, it will automatically default to category 1. If you selected, if they were only at risk when you entered, the system will default it to category 2. So that's just another way the system is trying to help fill in and enter in information for the assessments. However, it can be changed to however you'd like, but the system does default that. Now, as with all the other sections, the system will automatically take this information and provide you an ongoing score for the actual section itself. Now, once you're done with that, with the section itself, you can just hit next and move on to the next section, which will be health and safety. This section has not changed, and this is basically collects information in 3 different sections. Their physical health, and asks basic questions about their general physical health, which you can answer as yes or no, and provides basic points based on any of the questions that you've answered, as well as it's got a section to identify any diagnoses that the client or how the client that you're working with assessing may have as well. And you can check one or more of the diagnoses that they have within that are listed there. And the system will automatically provide the points provided based on those answers. The mental health section is very similar. It asks a few questions about their situation and provides an area of identifying the experiences that they've had, mental health experiences, and based on the answers or selections that are provided, the system will provide points with that section. And similar with the substance abuse, it'll ask for any substance abuse history as well as identifying any of these experiences they've had. And with a lot of sections in the system, if you answer no to a question, that's usually it. That's all you have to answer. However, some of the questions are dynamic, or if you answer yes to certain ones, they can open up and require or provide the ability to answer additional information based on a previous question that you've answered, such as if they do have a history of substance abuse, it will ask for a bunch of follow-up questions based on that answer. And that happens a lot in the system to try to only show you the questions that are relevant to the information that you've entered. Now, once you've entered in each of those 3 health sections and you're done, you can go ahead and hit next and go to the next section. Now, one thing I do want to note, and I always note this with all the trainings, is at this point in time, when you're just hitting next and previous, the system is actually is not permanently saving the data at this point. It's basically just storing it in the, I guess, in the form itself. That's actually why we have this save button down here, because at this point, since I've only been using, the next buttons, if something were to happen and I would accidentally close the browser or the computer would have a problem, actually all the information that I just entered would be lost. So that's why we definitely recommend that every tab or 2, when you're initially entering in your screening, that you hit this save button. Once you've hit that save button, the system, any data or information that you've entered up to that point will automatically get permanently saved to the system. And if anything happens and you get disconnected, you'll be able to come back and reload the screening and have the information you've entered up to that point. So that's why I usually recommend hitting save, maybe not after every tab, but at least after every couple tabs to make sure that you're kind of saving your progress as you're going forward. The domestic violence, basically, since this is a GHC, it doesn't provide any points, but it does ask for whether they've been a domestic violence survivor or not. That basically is a callback to their history. So they could be a DV survivor while not currently fleeing or potentially to flee. The next section is veteran status, and this is basic information about any active duty within the armed forces of the United States, and provides points. Any veteran, anybody that selects yes to this question, they will be identified as a veteran, and they will get points based on that. As you can also see, if they are a veteran, it does open up and ask a whole bunch of information about their service history, which can be filled in. And I'll just enter in a little bit of this information. Once you have entered that in, we're going to go ahead and hit next. And as you can see, once you've opened up a tab, you can always go back to it by hitting previous and make changes anytime throughout the screening itself. So you can always go back if you want to check something, or you need to make a mistake, or you think you might have made a mistake, you need to review something. The 6th tab is the income and benefits tab. This basically is kind of a combination. It collects information about income and benefits, but it also collects information about employment. So it asks whether they're employed or not, and depending on if they're employed or not employed, it asks a couple different follow-up questions to it, which are basic drop-down boxes for what type of work they're working on, or if they're not employed, the reason they're not employed. Types of income basically provide you a big list of all the different sources of income they may have, and this is on a monthly basis. It's their gross monthly income. So if they have multiple sources of income, you can go ahead and select them within the list itself. It does allow for multiple different types of income to be selected, as well as to enter in the total amount of gross monthly income to be entered there. Same with the non-cash benefits. You can enter in one or more of any cash benefits that they are receiving. Or if they're not receiving either or none, you can leave both of those boxes empty. The system will score based on your answers. Household. This is broken up into family and individual, and basically delineates between whether we're working with an individual client or we're working with a household itself. Now, with an individual, basically that's all you need to select. And this kind of, when you're viewing them on the prioritization list or looking at their assessment, it kind of provides their breakdown of whether it is, a family or an individual. It also asks for number of people in the household, and if housing is needed, number of bedrooms required. With individual, that's fairly self-explanatory. So you can fill in one if you want, but it's not necessarily required. Now with family, that's where if you have multiple household members or multiple people presenting together, the system actually asks for a bunch of additional questions, as well as provides scoring for any family. Actually automatically gets 20 points, while individuals don't. They don't get those 20 points for their on the assessment. But once you select family, it actually opens up and it actually provides you with a family grid, where it actually asks you to enter in all the additional household members that are with the head of household or the person that you are assessing at the time. You should see the person you're currently on, since they're currently in the system, and of course you're assessing them, they will be listed there at the top. But for family, to add in each additional household member, the way the grid kind of works is it's kind of like a quick entry method way of entering in multiple people, and each row in the grid can represent or represents a individual household member. So as you can see here, whether there's 2 people in the household or 10 people in the household, the system will allow you to enter in those extra persons directly into this grid. And what we're going to do is go ahead and add an additional household member. Because this person is with a child. And what it asks for is it asks for, a lot like during the initial client intake, it asks for your, the first name and the last name of the client. And once you've entered in the last name, it does a client search. Many times since you're adding a household member, most likely is going to be a new client in the system. But if they do show up, you can select them and they will be imported into the grid automatically. But most of the times it is going to be a new client and they aren't going to be in the system. But from there, once you've entered in the name or determined that, hey, I'm going to create a new client, it asks for a whole bunch of demographic information that can be filled in or should be filled in, such as their gender, their date of birth, their relationship to the head of household, whether they're a spouse, son, daughter, that sort of information, as well as their race and ethnicity. As well as their veteran status. And what you can do is you can fill out each individual line for each additional household member that you have to make sure that they are all added into the system itself. Along with that, that's where you can also add number of people in the household. It's more relevant for the actual family members themselves. Although the system on the prioritization list does look at the household themselves for the number of people in the household, as well as how many are added to the prioritization list, which we'll actually show you during that placement process. And then it also has a section for family makeup that can allow for additional scoring, and they're based on very specific prioritization for certain family types. So if the family falls under any of these specific situations or configurations, if you will, you can check these boxes to identify them as such, and they will automatically be provided those additional points for those family makeups. Okay, once for the family, they've all been entered. And just like kind of with the homeless episode grid, you want to make sure that you don't accidentally have any of the extra or blank grids that you're not entering people in highlighted or selected, or the system will kind of give you one of those validation errors. So just something to point out or remind people to make sure to only have the highlighted household members that you're actually going to enter. And then we're going to go ahead and hit next. And the last one is the criminal background, which actually shows whether criminal history or not, and shows the scoring if they do have criminal history or not. You can enter in information on that, as well as interactions, as well as they've had any of these experiences as well, and you can be provided points off those as well. Once that is done, you're going to get to the final screen, and that is the final page of it is an overall overview of the screening itself, and it provides whether they're identified as specific options within the system, as well as the number of days currently homeless, as well as the scoring within each individual section as well. Now, actually looking at the youth, you know, which is anybody under age of 25, I also want to mention we did make an update to youth as well. Now, traditionally, and this is for GACs themselves, traditionally, youth, anybody identified as a youth gets 70 points, and that's any head of household that's under 25 years of age. And how we traditionally do it is we use the assessor's date of birth to determine whether they are a youth or not. So the system would automatically use that date of birth to calculate that scoring. But we've kind of found that there are certain situations where the date of birth is not collected, or the client doesn't know, or client refuses to give it, and there's no way of providing a client with these points when the assessor obviously knows that they are under 25 and they should be provided with youth points. So what we've actually done is on the family tab, we've actually added this youth head of household checkbox. And this is the same box the DVACs hopefully are already familiar with it since they can't enter in date of birth due to the PPI rules. That allows you to automatically identify a client as a youth, even if their date of birth hasn't been entered. Now, as you can see here, the youth head of household is checked and it is grayed out. Now, the reason for that is the client does have a date of birth and he's under 25, so he's automatically being identified as a youth. But if the situation were something where okay, well, it's not allowing me to change it. Okay, well, that's a problem that I'll have to look into. But if there is no date of birth entered, the system will have this box open and allow you to check it to identify the client as a youth if you're at a GAC, so that for those clients that are youths but don't have a specific date of birth entered can also get the 70 points involved with being a youth there. Didn't mean for that to take that long, but I did want to mention that is a small, subtle change that we've added to the screening assessment as well. Now, once you're happy with the score, and all the data that's entered, you can go ahead and hit finish at the bottom of the screen, and the system will pretty much refresh itself and give you basically the entire screening itself again. But what it'll do is allow you to place them on the prioritization list. And this is actually the last step of the process. And if you go ahead and click that button, it'll actually take you directly to the placement process of actually putting them on the prioritization list. By default, the client will automatically be filled in. It'll allow you to include household members. So any household members that are active and want to be with that household on the prioritization list, you want to check or include with them there. So make sure they are selected. By default, all 6 service needs are selected. I know where there's processes that are going on to try to make this more automated. We haven't got there yet, but for now, all 6 are automatically selected. However, since you're the assessor and you know their needs better after the assessment, you do have the opportunity to remove or specialize those services to make them more specific for their placement on the prioritization list. So that is available and possible as well. Homeless category. This determines whether they are Category 1 or not Category 1. And it's basically helps determine whether this client's housing needs meets Category 1 classification or not. And it's basically a helpful addition to the prioritization list for quick classifications. Available counties, you're required to pick at least 1 county. And this basically describes what counties the client is willing to be served in or housed in. You can choose multiple counties that the client may be willing to be served in. We also have a Western CSC county map that can pop up to help view. If the client needs a listing of the geography of the CSC to help them make decisions there. Assigned staff, this is the person that the assessment provider that is assigned the client. It automatically defaults to the current user, but it can be changed to anybody at your agency. To do that, you can go ahead and click on this option and click off the default, and it will basically give you pretty much all the users in the system, and you can further search by organization or case manager if you need to, although most of the time it defaults to the person that's doing the assessment and who should be associated with. The last thing is the provider itself, and there are a lot of providers that only have a single location or only provide services in a single county. For them, it will automatically default to that specific county, but I do know that there are many providers that have assessment sites or assessment locations in multiple counties. For those, They will be listed here down below. As you can see, we've got Lawrence County with Blair and Lawrence. You want to make sure that you are selecting the proper provider or provider location of where the intake assessment and the list placement occurs for reporting and tracking purposes. Now, once you're ready and added in all that information, you can go ahead and hit Add to Prioritization List. And the system will automatically place them onto the list itself. And what it actually does is it takes you back to the coordinating screening tool assessment and then allows you at that point to review the screening tool again if you want, but you can go ahead and look at the coordinated intake notes and allow you to enter in any coordinated intake notes that you want at the time that may be helpful from your assessment, that may help the CES partners or people viewing this client on the prioritization list to help serve them or work with them in the future. Okay, that pretty much takes care of the main intake and assessment process. Know we're at like about 2 o'clock, run over a little bit. What I want to do now is I'd like to, before I cover some of the coordinated intake notes, as well as we do have document upload sharing as well, is I want to cover within the guide itself, we also have intake assessment, the DVAC version. I'd like to cover that quickly. And of course, we're not going to cover it as much as in depth as we did the GACs, as I'd probably say 90% of it is exactly the same. There are a few differences that I'd like to cover with the DVACs to make sure we're on the same page with them. Now, with the DVACs, they actually have their own specific work group within the system. It's the Western Coordinated Entry DV group that allows them to enter in to the DVACs. And also want to let people know that have multiple work groups. Everybody should have up at the top of their screen where you've got your help and your sign out, should be your name, and you can click on that, and it actually gives you the option, and they're kind of the same options when you log into the system where it prompts you for your work group or your organization. It allows you to actually flip between work groups and even organizations if you happen to be a few of those people that work in multiple organizations, where so you don't have to log out and log back in every time. This allows you to change it directly on the fly, either of those options. So now what I am is I'm logged in as a DVAC, and the process is pretty much very similar. The coordinated entry intake starts the process as a whole. Now, one of the main areas that is the most different between the two processes is we still have the intake, where you select an existing client or create a new one, the pre-screening, as well as the screening tool and the placement on the prioritization list. But the number one difference is with the DVACs is no what we call PPI, or it's also called PII, basically personally identifying information can be entered for any of their clients. So no names, date of birth, social security numbers, addresses, any information that could possibly identify the client. So that's why we have to use IDs within the system to be able to track them in the future. So when they start with the intake, you basically have 3 options in which to locate existing clients. An HMIS ID, which is the automatic ID that the system, the client track system provides, a DVAC ID, which is an ID that can be provided by the assessment center and can be whatever the assessment center likes and can be changed if needed to track the client, as well as a phone number. So if you're looking for a returning client and they have either an ID or a DVAC, you can enter it in here, and the system will allow you to go ahead and do a search on them to try to locate them in the system itself. However, if you don't find anybody in the system that matches, either the DVAC or an HMIS ID, then you'll have to create a new anonymous client in the system. And that's probably what's going to happen for most cases going forward when doing new intakes for DVACs. So we're going to go ahead and hit Save and Continue, and this is a new client. As we saw, there was no client in the system with that DVA, with that ID. There's also the pre-screening itself, and they have the same rules itself that were laid out before. They have the pre-screening is exactly the same. The one main difference is because the fair housing questions, we can't directly send an email with any of the client's information because A, we don't have it, and B, we don't want to be sending their information out. It will provide a link to a website to allow the anonymous client to directly go to the website and log a request for legal advice if they were discriminated against. So that's probably the only difference between the two in the system, is the same rules are applied there as well. Once you've entered in the pre-screening questions, you hit Save and Next, Save and Continue. And the system will then load the coordinated screening tool, and as you can see, it's got basically the same screens, the same sections, and the same scoring. The main difference, of course, is no PPI, no names, no personal identifying information. That is all hidden, and everything's all tracked by IDs. Now, with the homeless grid, with DVACs, since a lot of the information is collected automatically, and I guess collected or derived and calculated automatically from the homeless history grid, they will need to enter in homeless history information so that it's properly calculated for a number of days homeless, continuously homeless, and the other information. What we've actually done is to keep their information as private as possible. Instead of having the specific locations defined, like shelter or transitional housing, which could possibly be used to track them, they have a specific attempting to flee DV situation, which is seen as a homeless situation, and doesn't allow for any location or description, as well as any reason for leaving to be entered. But this location does allow for the basic start and end dates to be entered. As well as the breaks to be calculated as well. Other than the locations and them being completely devoid of any PPI or any information that could track back to them, the grid does work exactly the same as shown before. and they'll need to use that to fill out the grid. So the information such as all the days and the episodes can be properly calculated going forward with this release. These are the same. Domestic violence, automatically, since we are in a DVAC, it is automatically defaulted to them being a survivor, but they get the additional options of whether they're currently fleeing, because I know people sent to the DVAC could be not only fleeing but potentially fleeing, so that discretion can be made during the assessment. Whether they are actually fleeing or not can be determined here within the scoring itself, and the score will reflect the information entered on the section of the screening. The other section, pretty much all the other sections, if I've skipped them, they work exactly the same as we showed previously. One of the other main differences is even if you select family, we don't ask, that family grid does not come up, so we don't ask for any additional household members, anything like that, since of course we're keeping everything as private as possible. But if they are a family, you do want to try to use this number of people in the household for the DVACs, because since the household members aren't entered, we actually use this information to derive number of household members when they're on the prioritization list. And then there is also the use of head of household checkbox. That is there since we don't have a date of birth to be able to automatically calculate it. And when checking this, we'll automatically give them the 770 youth points if they happen to be under the age of 25. And I'm going to quickly show you placement on the prioritization list. Again, it works very similarly, except no names are there. It only shows the IDs, the DVACs, and then pretty much the placement is going to work exactly the same as well, where you're going to pick the available counties, pick their homeless category, as well as assign staff. Now, of course, with that, you want to make sure you don't enter in any client contact information for any DVAC or any DV or anonymous client within the system there. And then you can hit Add to Prioritization List. The client, when they are created, they will be named basically Anonymous Client. That's kind of the moniker that's associated with them. And pretty much everything throughout the system and how they're tracked, they're basically going to be seen by either their client ID or HMIS ID, or if you've entered in that DVAC ID number, that's how they're going to be tracked and followed on the prioritization list, as well as in the system itself for finding and tracking these clients. So those are kind of the main differences between the two systems, but conceptually and process-wise, both of them are pretty much exactly the same. Okay. I think before we jump to the prioritization list side of everything, I'm going to go ahead and check to see if we have any questions. I know we had a couple questions from earlier. Okay, I don't see any new questions here. I know there's a couple questions from earlier that I'm hoping that we can get to at the at the end of the training. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and continue on, and we're going to jump to the prioritization side of the process. What we just showed you is basically the intake, all the assessment centers, GACs, DVACs, and how to get them into the system and onto the list. So now we're going to open it up and show on the prioritization list side. This is not only for our assessment centers, this is for all CES partners. We have made some changes to how some of the prioritization list functions work. I don't think it's really process-based, just some additional features, especially within the search processes, to kind of make searching and locating clients on the list a little bit easier. And we're also going to cover some semi-new features, such as the service inquiry that we released semi-recently ago, to make sure everybody is on the same page with using some of the new features that have been recently released in the system as well. So we're going to cover basically the search, some of the statuses, and then we'll jump into some of the prioritization list management records or functions, basically kind of the button push stuff. And then we'll get into the list review, which will kind of meld both functionality as well with a little bit of policy as well, of how to scrub and view clients on the list. Okay, so as you can see, basically the prioritization list is located within the provider tab. When you click on that, you should load yourself on the provider tab. One thing to note is when you go into the provider tab, you should see your provider or your agency up at the top here. If you don't, you want to make sure that you click on this Access Provider. When you click on that, it basically gives you a list of all of the providers under your organization. So you want to make sure that you select the provider that you're working under or working for, to make sure that's up at the top of the screen, to make sure everything goes smoothly with any of the prioritization list processes. The prioritization list itself should be located and is available to any CES partner. Once you become a partner, we basically add you to the group within the system. And for any agency that is a partner, when they do come into the provider tab, they should automatically have this prioritization list folder. And within this folder itself, you're going to see about three menu options. We've got the prioritization list itself. Then we have, I'm going to actually flip back to the regular coordinated entry group. The prioritization list, we've also got an option for the service inquiries, which we're going to cover during this section. And then we also have a section for the prioritization list reports, which are the details as well as the provider details. And both of these are really good reports that we're probably not going to be able to cover today in the training. The details is basically a report form of the prioritization list, while the provider details is more of a summary of how you're doing in terms of placements and acceptances off the list themselves. So they're available to anybody to go in and view and use within the system. The prioritization list itself is within the option here. So if you click on the prioritization list itself, it will basically load by default all of the clients that are currently on the list. We're doing this in the training site right now, and as you can see, there are only 6 results. The actual production site is much, much larger. There's a lot more clients on it, but by default, it will show all clients that are currently on the active list. Basically, each client has a row, is in their own row and basically provides general information about that client themselves. You know, their IDs, their names, available households, categories, screening types, their status, days in the current status, as well as their current assessing county provider and user. So it provides a lot of like summary information about that client itself. And each of them will be listed below. Now, with the search options, there are a bunch of search options within the list itself, and these can be used to help kind of trim the list itself when you're looking for clients, especially during scrubs when you're looking for clients like within your own county or clients that are assigned to you, you know, within, you know, ones that you specifically assessed that came in your assessment site. These filters are very handy for filtering the list for those specific purposes. We've got service needs, so you can filter by service needs. We have got available county, and this is actually going to be an update. Currently in the system, you can only search by one county at a time. This will actually be opened up, so you'll be able to search multiple counties at the same time. Hopefully it'll be beneficial for those providers that serve multiple counties or have assessment centers in multiple counties, so they can do one search and one list from a specific filter. Subpopulations, this basically looks at all subpopulations within the list itself, and a lot of this information, most of it is pulled from the actual screening itself, you know, whether they're identified as veteran, youth, chronically homeless, DV, as well as whether they have issues, any mental health, physical health, or substance abuse issues. So those can be used to filter clients on the list. Another new one is age range. We've actually added that. We will be adding that to tomorrow's release. This will be brand new, so you'll be able to filter clients by specific age, and you'll be able to select more than one range at a time. So you can get a multitude of clients or different combinations of client ages. Like if you wanted 18 to 30, you could choose both of these. The other change that we have made is the system will not only allow you to search by client name, which basically you need to enter in last name, comma, first name, or just last name. The system automatically will allow you to search by default by ID or by the DVAC ID. So that's basically, you can use the HMIS ID or the DVAC ID directly on the screen to search for clients. So hopefully that'll help open up some things and allow locating clients a little bit better within the system itself. So those are the basic search options that you can use, and they can all be used in combination with one another. So you can get really detailed in terms of, you know, hey, I want to look for, maybe say you're in Lawrence County and you're a rapid rehousing provider, and you want to look for people that need rapid rehousing within Lawrence County that are veterans, and maybe veterans and chronic. I'm not sure if there are anybody that fits the bill. There aren't, because there's not a lot of people on the test list. But you would be able to really use the filters to get very specific with the list to find the number of clients listed to start reaching out to or communicating with people. The other options that we have are the assessing county and the assessing provider, and these are normally the the county or the provider that performed the initial assessment. They are basically assigned to the client. So these can be helpful when you're pulling a list of clients that you're assigned to basically take a view at your own client list to kind of review them, review their statuses, see how they're doing. So that's the basis for those two filters. We also have a refresh list button up here. So anytime you're in the middle of a search and you want to kind of just refresh things with the filters you have set, you can always hit that button and the system will do a brand new reset and refresh of all the filters that you currently have set on the system to kind of give you a rerun of the clients in the system based on your filters. The system basically has different types. By default, everybody that you see when you initially load the list is on the active list, and that's basically kind of all the people that are currently active on the prioritization list and are still looking for or needing services. There is the missing list, and those are those that are specifically set to the missing status. And then there is the historical. These are everybody that has been removed from the active list, and that's either all controlled through what we call the statuses. And I actually want to go to the guide to kind of give you an overview. Within the guide itself, we kind of have an overview of all the statuses in the system and kind of what they mean. And the filter, basically active versus historical and missing, use these statuses to show who's on which type of list. Now the statuses basically, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We basically have 6 main statuses. The first one is new, and that's basically the new status when anybody's initially placed on the list. This is the status they get defaulted from the system. And it basically stays on that new status until it is actually changed manually in the system by someone or an action. There's the in-processing status, and that status is used to show that the client is in a communication stage with a provider and is attempting to provide a service or enrollment to the client, or an enrollment has actually occurred. So the in-processing status is basically, hey, this client is working with a specific provider and is either really close to making a match and being provided services and enrollment, or has been provided service and an enrollment. So a lot of times with that in-processing status, those are the ones that you want to not zero in on, because at most of the time they are being worked on by providers, CES partners already. There's the reviewed status, and this is a status to indicate the provider may have been contacted or been processed, may have been in processing at one point, but a match was not made. It basically just shows that the client has been touched, is no longer new, and at least someone has reviewed that client in the system. Now, the first 3 statuses, the new, in processing, reviewed, as well as with the missing status, those are all the statuses that make up the active prioritization list. We also have, now from a historical standpoint, the non-active list. We actually have the placed and then the closed / turned away. The place, the status indicates a non-active list status and represents a positive housing outcome throughout the list, and it basically not only shows that the client received services and an enrollment through the system, but they are also have been given or are in a permanent housing unit or situation. The closed, turned away status is also a non-active status, so that will also remove them from the list. And this represents a person that is either no longer in need of permanent housing, their situation may have changed, they no longer meet homelessness requirements, or have lost contact and, were missing, lost contact with the community for a long extended period of time, and were removed for one of those reasons and were placed on the historic list. The last status we have is missing, and this is to denote that the client is in a period of non-communication, and even after repeated re-engagement attempts to try to get back in contact with the client, there was still no active communication with them, so they're kind of in that middle status of where people in the missing status are still on the active list, but it kind of gives them a subclassification that they're that they haven't been contacted in a long time. So I just wanted to kind of give, I guess, a visual representation of what each of those statuses means within the system, because they're actually an important point of updating the prioritization list records within the system itself. And they also take up the backbone of what makes up the active, missing, and historical lists themselves. Now, with that said, most of the time, the active list is what you're going to be working on. And when you are, what I want to do is go over some of the functions here with the actual prioritization list. We have the review prioritization list record, set to missing, and this set to missing is actually a new feature that's going out because we've made a couple changes to, there's some policy changes to who can be set to missing and what the requirements are for allowing someone to be set to a missing status. The coordinated intake notes, as well as document upload and sharing options, intake notes log, as well as there's the ability to go to the client's dashboard. If the client had shared, they selected yes to verbally share their record with the group during the intake. Review prioritization list record. While on the actual list itself, the system provides a pretty good summary of information about the client itself, but the prioritization list record itself is where all the main information about this client is kept. And it mirrors what you saw when we did the actual placement itself. It includes, household members included. I should actually check that. That should be included. Referral services, homeless category, available counties. It also has the status as well as days in status, as well as the assigned assessment status and client information. It's basically what we call the prioritization list record itself. And down at the bottom, it's got the services that they have and if they've had any acceptances, rejections, any information, any transactions or history or activity based on those services as well. So this is kind of where you go to review the record. It also allows you to make changes to any of the statuses or information within the list, within the record itself. Maybe their category has changed. Maybe their services are changed. So any of that information can be changed directly on the screen and can also be saved and updated directly on this screen. The other thing about the review record itself is this is also where you can quickly get to the client's screening tool assessments. Up at the top of the screen is the coordinated screening assessments. If you click on that option, it actually will load a screen that will show all of their screening tools. Most of them will only have one, and it will allow you to click on this little button here and give you the review screening tool option. And this allows you to basically, from the prioritization list area of the system, go into a client's prioritization list record and then go into their screening tool record as well. And this provides basically all the information provided and entered on their screening tool, and does allow for information to be changed, reviewed, updated as needed when you're working on clients throughout your list scrubs and list reviews. Okay, the next option, and we'll come back to the review prioritization list record a little bit, some of those options down at the bottom with the service inquiry and the service accept and reject. We're going to be covering those a little bit later in the next section. The next two that I want to cover are actually the coordinated intake notes, as well as the document upload and sharing. The coordinated intake notes can be found here, and this is actually a pretty important function and feature within the prioritization list and within the coordinated entry system as a whole, as this actually provides basically shared notes for the client throughout the system for all CES, for all coordinated entry partners. And it's basically where everybody should be entering in notes and reviewing notes to see, where the client's at, what updates, what communications have been made with them, any status changes that have been made, should be documented and can be reviewed within the coordinated intake notes to be used basically as a guide to see how the client's doing, and whether you need to reach out to them, not reach out to them. How it works is basically all the coordinated intake notes are shown here. This person only has one, as we automatically create a automated intake note when they get placed on the list. But all of them can be reviewed or edited by using this option here, and it comes in and it basically gives you information about the notes themselves, what the note actually says, and a lot of times the information should be specific about, contacted clients, they need, have 2 people in the household, looking for RS services. It's basically your main communication tool within the system, within the prioritization list, to help you, help all the CES partners talk to each other through the clients on the list. So again, whenever you're reviewing people or looking at people on the list, this is definitely an area that you want to go and check out, and make sure anytime you kind of contact or work with a client in the system, you definitely want to enter in a note to make sure that the contact or the action was documented so that someone else that's, another provider that's looking on the list and maybe coming by or reviewing that client will know the work that you've done or the contacts that you've made to help with the process in general. We also have, and this is kind of related with the coordinated intake notes, show the individual notes themselves, and then you have to go into each note individually to review them. We actually have an intake notes log. It's kind of a report that if you click on it, it basically, for that client, it provides you basically a log where it lists all of their notes in chronological order from the most recent down, and kind of gives you the actual body or note information themselves. Also who entered it, when they entered it. So it can be very useful to kind of use this as a supplemental option instead of having to go through each individual coordinated entry note to read the actual substance of it. You can use this intake note log to kind of get a quick synopsis of all of their notes, especially the most recent, as they'll be on top before contacting or working with the client themselves. The document upload and share. This is very similar to the coordinated intake notes in that it's kind of a universal place where all CES partners can share information together, but instead of it being notes, it is actually can be documentation. The system actually allows you to upload documentation, whether it's identification, eligibility, determination, and it allows you to choose, the choose file process where you can attach a file to it. You can also put multiple files into like a zip file if you want to create like a compilation of documents, and you can upload them into the system. By default, they automatically will get shared with everyone or all other CES partners. If it is something sensitive, or maybe this is something from a DVAC that you don't want shared with anybody, you can check this box, do not share this document, and it will only be visible to the provider that entered it. But if it's not checked, it will be shared with pretty much everyone throughout the system. So it's just like the intake notes, so it's a way to basically share documentation throughout the system. And this can be done from not only the prioritization list side, it can also be done from the intake side as well. Just like the coordinated intake notes can be entered from the intake and assessment side as well. I think that kind of goes over the main parts of the functions. We also, like I said before, we do have a client dashboard option. This is only available for those clients that specifically said they, share their client record with other CES partners. So that's why some clients may have it, some may not. But you can click on this option, and it will take you to the client tab and their specific dashboard. So you can get some extra information on them. That may be helpful. Now, within the coordinated entry work groups, we actually have a pre-enrollment screenings. And this is kind of for your coordinated entry, such as like pre-screenings in the screening tools. They can be found within the menu here. So if you ever want to load a client or load a dashboard from the prioritization list, you can come in here and view all their pre-screenings and kind of load them. You can also view any of their screening tools, and it also gives you the same options as shown before with the actual screening tools where you can review it, open it up, as well as you have the standard intake notes and the document uploads and sharing as well. Okay, so that kind of covers the kind of basic overview of the list itself, some of the search processes, the statuses, some of the prioritization list management functions. Now we're going to kind of get into the prioritization list review, and I know we only have about 10 minutes left. It's probably going to take a little bit longer than that. So I apologize for going over. We just have a lot of information here to cover. So it will be, if anybody that does have to go, we will be continuing to record, and we're hoping to have this recording out very soon. That'll cover this last part. But this is basically going to cover the prioritization list review and kind of hopefully give kind of a roadmap of the process of reviewing the list and going through the processes of service inquiry, the statuses, whether you can provide them service, not provide them services, the service acceptance and rejection feature, as well as the final options of the housing placement and non-housing placement for the clients themselves. Okay. So during the actual prioritization list review, when you are reviewing your list in the system, basically, and this can be whether you're reviewing individual clients that you're assigned to, or you're reviewing a list of clients that need housing within your area. If you find a specific client that matches the needs, service needs, with a potential opening that you might have, basically the steps that you can use to basically, I guess, notify the client that you have a potential opening and that you want to work with them or try to provide them with service. What you can actually do is go to the review prioritization list record, and we actually have a function called service inquiry. This is kind of an option that basically allows you to alert a client's assessing provider that, hey, we saw one of your clients on the list and we think his needs match a potential opening that we have in our projects or with some of the services we provide. So what you can do to kind of kick off that process is send the assessing or assigned assessing provider a service inquiry. And you can do that by going into, I think I did that a little quick, by going into the edit prioritization list record and going down to the bottom of the record itself, and there should be a service inquiry option. We actually released this, I think, about a couple months ago for all GACs, and I think we've heard some feedback that it's been fairly successful, and it's basically a good way to begin the communication process between client and a potential matching provider. So what it's going to do is it's going to automatically send the inquiry to whatever organization or provider, as well as the user that is assigned to that client, that, hey, I'm from provider X, I have potentially the following service available, and I want to potentially work with this client to see, start the eligibility documentation process to see if we can get him a potential service or enrollment into our project. So what you do is you come in here and you pick, who the inquiry is coming from, which is going to be your provider. And you want to make sure you pick the specific county that you're working for, the specific service that you're working, that you have a possible opening with. The subject, it auto fills in with the service, but you can add additional information to it if you want. And then you add in basically any notes or relevant information there as well. Once you hit that, you hit save, and what the system will do is it will create, well, first it'll send the service inquiry through the system automatically, and it's actually an electronic record that goes to the assessing or the assigned provider, as well as it pops up an email template that basically is a secondary notification of the service inquiry that shows the assigned agency as well as the assigned case manager that there is a service inquiry that's coming through for a potential match, who it's from, as well as any notes you have. It basically gets sent to the sender, the assigned case manager, as well as it also sends it to the point of contacts for the assigned provider as well, to let them know that there's an inquiry coming in for one of their clients. All of this template can be changed. You can add additional notes here at the bottom if you want. It is kind of just like a regular email. You can make changes to it. It is just a template, or make additions to it as well. Once you're happy with the email, you can just hit send, and that's a secondary way that the system will send out a communication that way. Now, with the inquiry itself, it also gets added to the coordinated intake notes, and it basically can be seen by everyone, and it basically can show, hey, it's an inquiry for what services.
You guys are complicated, your department. Goodbye.
Sorry about that. And can basically show information about the inquiry itself. Now, inquiries themselves, since it is kind of more of a transaction, will be read-only except for the people that it gets sent to or those who sent it themselves. So that's a great tool to use for clients that you find potential matches for on the list that you're not currently assigned to kind of get the ball rolling of trying to connect with that client. Because how it's supposed to work is once the assessing provider, the one that's assigned to the client, receives the inquiry, they should then start the process of contacting the client, getting the client in contact with the provider, that the inquiring provider, the provider that has a potential opening, to begin the process of finding or preparing that match. Now, I do want to note that with the service inquiries, up until now it was just a GAC, or it was only for, I guess not GACs, but it was only for general clients. Any anonymous or DV client, the service inquiry was not allowed, or we were not given permission to open it up for them yet. But we have received notification that the service inquiries can now be used for DV clients as well. So when you go into any DV client or anonymous client, this inquiry option will be available to them. It works in exactly the same way, where you can click on the inquiry, and it will allow you to basically send an inquiry to the assessing or assigned case manager and provider of that anonymous client to begin the process of finding a potential match. So that's another tool that is opened up for our anonymous DV clients as well within the system. Now, from the standpoint of service inquiries, now that kind of shown like how to send them, and that can be done for any client that you find a match on the list for and you have a potential opening for. Go ahead and send those inquiries out. Now, on the receiving end, any client or any provider that is assigned the clients or is an assessment center, you potentially could be receiving these inquiries coming in. What you want to look for is when you initially go to your provider tab, up at the top here, you'll see this notification icon. This is actually a notification icon that actually will tell you if you have service inquiries in your list. If you have pending inquiries that have been sent to you. So it's a nice quick way of visually confirming not only that you have service inquiries, but how many of them that you have pending. As you see here, we've got 4 pending here with them. And I do want to note that this is only a visual notification. You don't really, this is more just to alert you that the service inquiry is within the system itself. The service inquiries themselves are located right here. They're within the Western prioritization list, within the actual service inquiry folder. So if you do see any of these, alerts here, you want to make sure you go here into the service inquiry box. And this is where the actual transactions will be, where you can answer them and start working on the communication and everything with these actual service inquiries. Now, when you go into the actual service inquiries, and this can be seen for any provider, you actually can see the ones that have been sent to you as well as the ones that you have sent out themselves. Now, by default, it just shows all of them, but you can filter by ones that have been sent, you've received, ones that have been directly sent to you, or ones that you've directly sent out, as well as their statuses themselves. So once you get more than a couple inquiries, those filters will probably be useful to kind of work through, especially the pending ones when they originally get sent. Okay, now with the service inquiries themselves, when you go in there, you'll see each individual record, and it basically is going to show, who the client is. Again, if it's an anonymous person, it's just going to show an ID, show client anonymous, and use an ID to identify them. It's going to show who it's sending it to and who it came from, as well as what the service is for. And then it's actually going to also have a status. As you can see by the statuses, we basically have 3 main statuses. There's pending, and then there's 2 acknowledged statuses. And currently in the system, we have pending and then acknowledged. We actually are adding we're kind of breaking out the acknowledged into acknowledged client accepted and acknowledged client rejected. So that is while the actual inquiry process isn't changing, we have added a little more detail to the statuses themselves when updating and answering inquiries into the system. So what do the statuses mean? Basically, when a new inquiry is sent, that's basically pending. A new one gets sent, it stays in that pending status until the person it got sent to actually answers it and acknowledges it. And they can acknowledge it with either the client accepted the inquiry, meaning, hey, the client, you know, we got them together with the inquiring provider, they made the match, and the client accepted the offer, and it's good to go. Or, you know, it's acknowledged, but the client rejected the offer, or the offer was not fulfilled. So those are what the basic statuses mean in the system itself for these inquiries. Now, to review the inquiries themselves, you go to the basic menu option here, and they've got an edit review inquiry. And it shows the basic information from it and any notes that have been added. And you have the ability to just change the status down at the bottom, accepted or rejected once the information is known about once the client's been connected with the two providers and whether the inquiry worked out or it did not. Once you change the status, basically you hit save, and that will update it in the system itself. Now, once the status is changed to an acknowledged status, as you'll see up here, once it hits save, the system will actually, see as that was at 4, it went down to 3. It'll actually take away those alerts. So once you've dealt with all the pending statuses or pending inquiries, the alerts will basically disappear. So those only show the ones that are pending themselves. It also allows you to go directly to prioritization list record, and it also allows communication 2 ways between the two providers, because you basically got the sending provider and you've got the receiving provider. You've got the two parties that the electronic record is between. So you can click this box, and it's basically a follow-up email. And it's a lot like that initial email that we showed when the initial inquiry is sent. If you check that box and hit save, the system basically, again, will pop up there it goes. Will pop up a follow-up message and automatically fill in the appropriate email addresses, depending on, you know, whether it's a follow-up from the inquiring provider, whether it's a follow-up to the inquiring provider, where you can go ahead and add in any follow-up notes so you can kind of communicate electronically back and forth with the actual you know, caseworkers and providers themselves to try to help with electronic communication. So that's always available there and can always be used for those service inquiries. Okay. So that is the service inquiry. And basically, the next thing that I want to show is the statuses themselves, the actual the service acceptance and the service rejections, and they kind of tie off of the the inquiries themselves, as well as, if you contact a client on the list that you may be assigned to and you might be trying to work directly with them, like you wouldn't need an inquiry in that manner, but you're going to still try to find them housing. Once you provide service to a client or attempt to provide service to a client, basically we have a service acceptance and service rejection in the system that basically records whether you are able to provide a service to a client or whether you weren't able to provide service to a client. So once you've kind of gone through the process of trying to match up the client with a potential housing or service, what you can do is go through this process, the service acceptance rejection, and this allows you to, if you have provided a client with a service, you actually want to go in and record a service acceptance. And that basically shows that, hey, I provided the client with service and potentially enrolled them into one of my programs. Conversely, if you worked with a client and you didn't provide them with a service, but you still went through the inquiry process and eligibility process, you want to go into the system and record a service rejection that basically records that you tried, but you didn't provide the client with a service in the system. Now, this is kind of a single option that allows you to collect both options either way. What it does is it's based on the specific client itself, and it's within the prioritization list record. It's kind of right next to the service inquiry, and it shows all the services that the client is available for. Also, who you are, as in the actual services provided, the providing service. And then it basically has accepted or rejected. So if you provided the client with services, you want to select accepted. If you didn't provide the client with a service, you want to select rejected. Now, something that we've added with the rejections that you'll see is it actually will show a reason for the rejection, and that's whether the client was rejected by a client, whether the client actually rejected the offer, or whether the rejection was by the project themselves. So we want to try to start keeping track of the reason for the rejection themselves. So one of those two need to be selected if a rejection was entered into the system. Now, if you're entering a rejection, if you didn't provide them a service, basically that's all you need to enter, and you can just hit save. And the system will automatically record that into the system. Now, for an accepted status, which basically means, hey, they're provided a service and an enrollment. If it is a permanent housing service, which is either permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing, and it is a service acceptance, the system by default will automatically set that client status on the list to in processing. And that basically means, hey, they're in an enrollment, and they're in a permanent housing enrollment, and they are still awaiting permanent housing. So you can accept and reject that. You can accept that from that standpoint. The service acceptance will be recorded. However, the client will be set to in processing and will remain on the active list. Now, the system also allows you to select the status of placed, and that's kind of why we went through the statuses a little bit earlier. You know, the in-processing status is meant to, hey, I'm working with a client, you know, I'm really close to providing a service or enrollment, or I have provided a service and enrollment, but they're still active on the list because they haven't been placed into a permanent housing unit yet. The placed is to be used when, you know, they have been provided service and enrollment and have been placed into a permanent housing unit. So if during the service accept and you've done the enrollment and they're immediately going to be, you know, immediately placed into a permanent housing unit, you can select their status to be placed. And what that'll do is that not only will record the service accept, it'll set their status to placed and completely remove them from the active list. So that is an option that can be used, but only if you know and have confirmed that they're actually in a permanent housing situation or a permanent housing unit themselves. Most of the time, especially with things like rapid rehousing, it is going to be a two-step process. And that's why the default is to in-processing. So once you've accepted or rejected the service accept or reject, the system will basically refresh the screen, and it will give you a number of basic navigation options where you can return to the client, return to the prioritization list. If it is an exception where you've accepted the client and you're going to perform an enrollment on it, it will also provide you with additional options to go directly to a client's dashboard or to directly start an enrollment. But if it's a DV client or a rejection, those two navigation options won't be available. So what I did is I went ahead and returned to the actual record itself because I wanted to show that the system then can record down in this area. It actually recorded the service acceptance within this area as well to kind of show a history of where they are with services. And as you can see, the system, the status also got set to in processing, which keeps them on the active list. So that goes through, that kind of covers the service accept and rejection part of the process. And that does, you do want to do that after you've, you know, worked with the client, you know, whether you've provided the service or not provided the service. So we've got the service inquiry, whether you provide service, not provide service, and then you record the service accept or the rejection. And then you've got the final set of whether the client is eventually placed in housing or if a client is not placed in housing, whether you've closed or placed them. And those are done directly within the prioritization list record themselves, and that's within the status itself. So if you actually go review prioritization list record, the status itself can be changed directly on the screen. And we're going to kind of continue along with the placement of this. This client was, you know, provided a service inquiry. The service inquiry was accepted. Then we provided a service accept for the client, and they were placed in processing. Now, once the client has been officially placed in housing, you know, they've been enrolled, and now they've been placed in housing, the last step is to go in and make sure that they're properly set to placed and removed from the active list. Since they're in permanent housing, they no longer need to be on the active list. So when you change the status to placed, it'll ask for a destination that they're placed into, which depending on what program they went into, and this one was permanent supportive housing, and we provided them with permanent supportive housing service. That was the destination that they went into, and we can go ahead and hit save. And that client will automatically be removed from the active list. Now, for those clients, now that may happen with those clients that you provide service with and they're enrolled. They could be in processing for a couple days, or it could be a couple weeks. It all depends on how long it takes for them from the enrollment to when they actually get permanent housing. But then it will be another step to go back onto the prioritization list and make sure that they are set to placed within the status itself, so they do get fully removed from the list itself. And hopefully those clients will come up in scrubs and reviews to make sure they get removed properly on the lists. Now, for those clients that aren't provided services and basically comes to a situation where they no longer should be on the active list, the system does also have a closed or turned away option. And that also needs to be done manually. And once you select either closed or turned away, it actually asks for a non-placement reason. And these are some of the reasons that you would remove a client from the active list. And it was, some of the reasons would be does not meet their homelessness or housing need requirements. Maybe their needs changed, their housing status has changed. They no longer meet the eligibility requirements of being on the list. Maybe they declined further contact from the list. Maybe they were deceased. Maybe they found housing on their own. So those are the reasons that, when contacting a client and, working with them and finding out that, hey, they no longer need assistance from the continuum on the list. This is when they can be sent to closed, and the proper reason selected, but that does need to be done manually through the actual record itself. And then when you hit save, the system will automatically place them into the historic side and remove them from the active list. And as you can see here, a lot of times when you do make a status change, the system will require you to enter in a coordinated intake note to make sure that the action was properly documented. So you can go ahead and enter in a note for that day, and the system will then allow you to continue forward and close them off the list. I think that about does it. I do know, and I know we've gone over by a good 20 minutes. I do apologize for that. There is one thing that I want to mention that is coming in a new release, and this is something that a lot of people mentioned, about having the possible need for, and that is the ability to transfer a client from one provider to another. Like say a client comes into someone in Lawrence County and then, you know, a month or two later they move, or now they are being seen by a provider in Washington County. We have the ability now to perform, I guess, what we call a provider transfer on the prioritization list. And what it actually can do is it allows us to actually change the assessing provider in the system to a new provider itself. However, we've made this preliminarily available by request. So you can reach out to Javon Clark or the HMIS Help Desk or myself, Brian, at HMIS to request one of these transfers. We will also have an option in the system. It will be available right next to the assigned provider where you'll be able to check an option here inside the edit within the prioritization list record that will allow you to send a request for a provider transfer, and it will be sent out to us, and then someone will contact you to get the information and the requirements on need for that. So I did want to mention that we do have that available now, and it will be by request for for an initial time period, so we can see how it goes, but it will be available on request. Also, within the guide itself, we have the full screening tool template available. It also has all the scoring points available within it as well. So hopefully this can be a decent resource for everybody to review that information if needed, also to use as templates and everything like that as well. I think that is going to do it. I know I've run you guys over by about 30 minutes. We have been recording, so what we're going to do is try to get this recording out. I'm hoping by tomorrow, as well as with this guide. And all the updates that you guys saw today, specifically for the pre-screening, a couple of those changes there. And kind of the big change was the homeless grid, homeless episode grid. That is also going to be going live tomorrow morning. So please reach out to HMIS Help Desk or Javon Clark at LCAP if anybody has any questions or problems. If anybody has any questions, yeah.
Before you hang up, I have just a few clarification points. I don't know how to share my screen.
I'm working on it, yep. Hold on. Okay, you should be able to go to the Quick Start tab and then share your screen.
Okay, yeah, it's up.
Perfect.
All right. So just some clarification for smooth operations. I wanted to clarify the DV entry point. So you can refer to Attachment A, which defines each entry point. For is anyone in your home making you feel unsafe or afraid, clients who meet HUD's homeless category 4 definition, and it includes human trafficking, will be sent through to this entry point. to have an assessment completed. You can refer to Attachment B for a listing of your local domestic violence assessment providers, as well as for a local listing of your general assessment centers as well. Whenever completing the homeless assessment grid, if we can be sure to provide the full name of the homeless service agency, their city and state, as much information as we can collect off the client, just to help with collection of eligibility documentation. That would be helpful to all parties involved with the coordinated entry system. Please stay away from abbreviating agency names or even street addresses, etc. When filling out the homeless assessment grid, I would, just select the best situation that describes that consumer's homeless situation, and then start to collect as the assessment center those eligibility documentations and obtain the releases, etc., if you have the time to do so or have access to that information. And then let's be sure to include the household members into the household before placing onto the prioritization list. In review of the list, there were several members not included, so when you go to create that prioritization record, you have to manually click on the individuals to add them to the household, and Brian showed us how to do that earlier. And then also another good point, you want to remember to just quickly, when you review the assessment, to make sure that there is a household screening type selected, i.e. family versus individual, because if nothing's selected there, the system will mark NA, just referencing that there was no response provided. So you want to be sure to select one of the options, and you also want to be sure to make sure that the household screening type that you selected matches the household composition. And then just remember the DVACs are highly encouraged to create a DVAC number. Basically for your tracking purposes. There were a few instances where you all, going over and you weren't able to tell which client was who, so utilizing that DVAC number would more than likely help your process. And then if everyone can start to respond to and acknowledge those service inquiries, it ultimately helps the provider with tracking who has accepted or rejected or even responded back to their inquiries. So Brian showed us again how to respond and acknowledge to the inquiries. And then again, for client transfer emails, if you can submit those requests, if you should have one, to myself at jclark@lcap.org or the PAHMIS help desk at ra-PAHMIS@pa.gov. And then also the guide that Brian was showing you all will be available on Workplace and the COC website for future use. And then lastly, next Thursday, join us again from 1 to probably 2, probably an hour. This would be your time to provide us feedback and ask questions specifically related to these new system updates. The training information is provided below, and it will also get sent out. So if your schedule permits, please join in. All right, well, that's all that we have today. Brian, thank you so much for your hard work in releasing all of these updates and everything that you've done for the COC. But if no one else has any questions, we'll go ahead and dismiss for this evening. Thank you so much.
Great.